Welcome, fellow tubers, twitchers, tweeters, and gamers. It's I, Pragmus, here to share something that has occupied my mind for a very long time. I'd say it's a thought experiment that I've had for better part of 7 years. Just to let you know, I'm a content creator for Altered Edge on Twitch and have a small presence on Twitter. So if you like to see a filthy casual like me act too big for his britches, thinking that he can game or whatever, check it out if you feel like it. Links will be in the description if you're interested. Just a disclaimer, there's going to be some information in here that isn't in the popular mainstream education system of America. And additionally, I took a different approach to how I made this video, which caused me to exchange the bad insanity in the world to a more fun type of insanity that I self-imposed on myself. I really do hope you all enjoy it. That out of the way, let me show you what took me a long time to put together. Sci-fi has always been an exercise of asking the question of what if. With authors of the likes of Isaac Asimov, Randolph Lalonde, and Robert Heinlein, movies such as Star Wars, Avatar, and Aliens, TV shows like Star Trek, Altered Carbon, and Stargate, and even interactive writing projects such as the SCP universe, it always sparks the imagination of what if. And sometimes, from these stories, some young, wide-eyed kid was inspired and invents the very things that are in these examples. The subject of this video is not to focus on the literature of fine authors, movies, or TV shows, but instead, video games. And specifically, Bethesda video games. So let's talk about the Bethesda games Fallout, Skyrim, and the upcoming game Starfield. Bear with me, Skyrim does deserve an honorable mention, but we'll get to that. But first, let's talk about the idea of alternate timelines. Some would say it's the basis for alternate realities, universes, whatever. But I'm just an idiot with a microphone and a computer, but I'm not as high-minded or big-brained as being able to explain to you succinctly what multiverses is. But what I have found interesting is cause and effect. You do this and that happens. Even not making a choice is a cause. A fantastic example of this is the game Prey. Prey explores this and literally shows a timeline exhibit to the player in the museum of that game. I won't go into too much detail, but suffice it to say, John F. Kennedy was not assassinated. Anyway, if you haven't played the game, I envy you the experience that is in front of you. I definitely recommend playing that game. Anyway, Fallout explores the question of what if. Namely, what if the unthinkable happens and the countdown reaches midnight? In other words, worldwide nuclear Armageddon. It shows that the American-Russian Cold War didn't happen, and instead, the resource wars spark off a huge beef with China as the big bad and leads to the most decimating war a theoretical world can experience. There is a series of situations, decisions, let's say circumstances, both big and small, that leads to an alternate timeline within the Fallout universe that diverges wildly after World War II in our universe. And there are random things that were canonized even as far back as 1908 within the Fallout franchise. Yeah, just for an example, Sunset Sarsaparilla was founded back then. Anyway, if the lore and history of Fallout interests you, I highly recommend checking out their YouTube channel of Rad King, which should be on screen right about now. It's pretty damn comprehensive and entertaining. Anyways, I digress. Moving on. Officially, Starfield is in a universe all its own, and not to denigrate from the eggheads over at Bethesda. Sometimes the better content is the questions not answered explicitly, and it's us the fans that raise some pretty neat brain teasers and questions. Fallout 4 has a plant that directly references Nirnroot within the Elder Scrolls Oblivion and Skyrim games. Elder Scrolls has little Easter eggs of its own, referencing Fallout. Because of this, it's a fan theory that Fallout and Skyrim universes, or timelines, are linked in some way. Couple that with the Elder Scrolls Dragon Break concept, everything can be possible. Now, granted, these might just be Easter eggs, which Fallout was always heavy with. At any rate, it's just fun. I've always entertained a thought experiment, where I asked myself, what if the aftermath of World War II didn't result in the Cold War? What series of events needed to go right instead of left, as it did for our world, our time? At the risk of becoming a boring history lesson and turning this into an overly long video, let's check out the events leading up to 1945. I could do this one of two ways. The first, outline the cliff notes of the Malta Conference, the Yalta Conference, and the meeting at Potsdam, making it a very boring history lesson, or just do the more expedient version of real-world happenings and glossing over the political ins and outs of three different world superpowers. I'm going for the lesser thickness of dust with a little more context. Translation, a mix of the two. Understand I'm glossing over a lot of details here. It's a messy bit of history with a lot of moving parts. It was a world war after all. But the points that we need to know going forward are these. It seems that Winston Churchill had met with Stalin a few times before the historic Malta Conference, which was really about trade and shipping routes. Schemed, if I can use that word, between Britain and America. Directly after that was Yalta, which then included Russia. Churchill's mandate was to safeguard future economic superiority of Great Britain and maintain England's empire. FDR's concern was securing help to fight the Japanese, and Stalin's concern was just straight up security infrastructure. As the saying goes, wartime makes for strange bedfellows. Now, I can imagine that FDR and Churchill had already talked about what they needed at Malta. And when they included the Russian delegation, FDR figured he'd secure Soviet assistance with the Japanese. It all came down to money. Stalin wasn't getting a single pound from Churchill, as Stalin probably already figured what the cigar-munching Brit was about. And I can imagine, much to Churchill's dismay, FDR agreed to help Stalin with rebuilding in return to secure Soviet manpower to kick the Japanese off the Asian continent. Now, for a minute here, I actually want to talk about the vice presidents of Franklin Delano Roosevelt, also known as FDR. Now, FDR was the only president in the history of American politics to hold the office for 3 terms. Because of World War II, is a very scary point, and he had 3 different vice presidents. The first one was Garner. He doesn't matter for this topic. But the second one was Wallace, and the third one was Truman. So Wallace and FDR had a pretty good working relationship while serving their terms in the White House. No doubt, with Wallace working within the Senate before his vice presidency, backing much of the policies that FDR spearheaded, such as the New Deal. I'm sure that FDR and Wallace sat around talking with each other about world events and playing the political version of what if. When Truman had a last-minute ballot change at the re-election and ultimately won the vice presidential ballot to serve under FDR, well, let's just say Frankie wasn't too pleased about it, but he had much more pressing issues occupying his mind, as he died in April of 1945, losing his arduous fight to polio. Further, during Truman's term, the policies put forward and actions taken was vehemently opposed by Wallace after the war was completed, which in turn caused Truman to straight up kick Wallace out of politics altogether. Rivalry at its finest, Anyway, just for brevity's sake, Wallace served as FDR's second vice president from January 20th, 1941 to 1945, with Truman taking over the office of vice president until April 12th, 1945, ascending to the presidency after FDR's death. So, why is all that important? Well, here's the dusty bit. At the Conference of Potsdam, after the defeat of the National Socialist version of Germany happened, me trying to sidestep YouTube. Anyway, it happened around July 17th to August 2nd, 1945. It's believed that Stalin, through espionage, knew the Manhattan Project, and evidence suggests that Stalin knew about it even before Truman did. However, Truman, who didn't want to honor the deal that FDR made, figured that he had 2 aces up his sleeve. Atomic ones. The Soviets reaffirmed their promise, though, regardless, to promptly launch the invasion of Japanese-held areas on the Asian continent, with the understanding that Truman would honor our side of the bargain. Now, I don't know if Truman lied here or not, but he had no intention of giving a single dollar to Soviet Russia. Anyway, in short, and this pains me when I learned of this because it goes against everything I was taught, American education, baby. Atomic bombs didn't win us the war with Japan. It was the Soviets that prompted the Japanese surrender. Where's my evidence on this? Well, let's consider the timeline. Hiroshima and Nagasaki were bombed on the 6th and 9th of August. Russia formally declared war on the same date of the bombing in Nagasaki, which was August 9th. Japan then surrendered 6 days later on August 15th. Now, I'm going to break script here and suggest one thing. If the atomic bombs won us the war, Japan should have surrendered right after the 6th and 9th of August, directly after the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, but they didn't. What were they holding out for? I'll tell you. They were holding out hope that their Asian-born Japanese forces would not be routed by the Russian military. But back to the bombing. Our conventional bombings campaign was pretty intensive and started as early as 1942, but didn't start with a vengeance until 44. I mean, the amount of ordnance dropped over Japan is staggering, and that's looking at it from the perspective of United States Marine Aviation Ordnancemen. I mean, we firebombed a solid 16 square miles of the Japanese capital, Tokyo. Okay, we got through the history shit. If you're still with me, props to you, because scripting this took about 5 different revisions and a lot of different retries on recording. So I appreciate you. No doubt, someone's fingers are already twitching and itching, wanting to feel the clickety-clack of a keyboard underneath them, textually screaming at me and whatnot, and that's fine. We can talk, discuss, put forth evidence, debate, whatever. If you come at me with different info, that's fine too. Now to get to why we are really here. The deflection points in the timeline. Deflection point 1. What if FDR's Vice President Wallace got reelected as FDR's third vice president instead of Truman? And my flight's a fancy. Totally intended the pun there. The bombs wouldn't have been dropped on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Deflection point 2. Hiroshima and Nagasaki wouldn't have been bombed, and instead, the wartime effort that sparked the Manhattan Project would more than likely have pivoted to something where the scientists would have been way more happy with. Oppenheimer's quote of the Trinity test site, "Now I become death, the destroyer of worlds," on July 16th of 1945 would still be in the zeitgeist of our culture, but it wouldn't hit as regretful as it does now, and would serve as a warning for future use of the weapon. And finally, deflection point 3, and this is the big one. Russia, with China as an ally, would have been changed through cultural exchange with the democratic world. And the real treasure and loot that was yielded out of World War II was the German scientist that was scooped up via Operation Paperclip, which led directly to the formation of the United States NASA organization. So you guys want to know how Starfield relates to this train of thought, right? One of the two things that could have happened, one very likely and the other highly unlikely, but still possible. The first, the space race never would have been kicked off by the Russian Sputnik orbiting the Earth and America soiling its Superman underoos and scrambling to catch up, all the way up to, but not including, landing on the moon with the Apollo missions. Or, and follow me on this, the more improbable path. Russia, China, America, anyone else all came together and sings Kumbaya Star Trek style right into space. China was Russia's ally during World War II, but a silent one, as it is in current events now. We have real-world examples here, now, within the ISS program. If I did some digging, I'm sure I could find some fantastic examples of scientific collaboration between nationalities that are traditionally unfriendly on the world stage. Well, that's it, folks. Like I said in the beginning, I stream various games over on Twitch, mostly indie stuff and new IPs. And if you're still here and got this far, I thank you for your time and attention. I hope I've earned your subscription. Just so you know, don't worry, I'm not going to put out 10 shorts and 5 videos a day. I ain't got time for that, and I suspect that you don't either. Till next time, stay safe and out of trouble. The pay sucks, but the benefits are great. Take it easy, guys.